Hi everyone, this is Christina Barr and you're watching Black Tea News. Hello everyone. Today we're going to be talking about this so-called threat of white supremacy that Joe Biden, the Democrats, even our FBI are really truly obsessed with. But I'm going to agree a little bit that there is a threat of white supremacy, but it's not really what you think it is. Because a lot of the people pushing it and talking about it and claiming that they care about it are really the perpetrators of such things. So yesterday I talked about a couple of CNN broadcasts on New Day with Breonna Keller. And specifically, she was talking to a black congressman who happened to be Republican, and so the Black Congressional Caucus didn't want him in. And so he's like, well, essentially they're going to have to explain their own opinion on why they don't want me in, and we'll have to, their statement was like different moralities or values or whatever. And so, well, they'll have to speak to that specifically. And then she begins to list all the explanations as to why she thinks that's so. And so she has a montage prepped and ready to go of things that Trump said, which, one of the examples was him pointing to the crowd and saying, that's my African American. And another example was asking like a crowd of people, do you prefer to be called blacks for Trump or or African Americans for Trump, and like asking a crowd what they wanted to hear. So I don't know why something like that would be in the do not support Trump pile, why you shouldn't support Trump pile. And whatever. So she had a list of a montage, and when montage got done playing, he said that Trump has nothing to do with this. And she's like, well, I think it does. And so it just really goes to show you that a lot of these people believe that they espouse like all these values, and like there's some kind of like, I don't know, benefits or perks or some kind of virtue in being a minority. But if you're not the right kind of thinking minority, then they just talk to you down all kinds of ways. They and they treat you like garbage and they despise you. And that's something that I've had to deal with for a while now. And there'd always be like contention between like a little bit between like black Democrats and black Republicans or something like that. People were like, oh my gosh, you're a Republican. But that always kind of seemed like, I don't know, family infighting, like still like not great, but like at least that was like in-house or something. But like during the 2016 campaign and stuff like that, I really started to see like liberals lose their ever-loving minds, like white liberals who are just like totally offended by the fact that I had my own mind and could think for myself. And so I never like to throw the word racist around, and I don't feel like I throw it around, but I certainly use it a lot more than I used to, because when people feel like you're not entitled to have your own thought, and they think minorities don't deserve to have a sense of agency, or that they can't afford to make up their minds like white people can do that, have the freedom to do that, then I find that racist. So I'm going to call you out on it, and I have called a lot of people out on it. I also talked yesterday that there's a epidemic really of people calling black conservatives pick-me's. And that means that they believe that what you say, you're just saying it for white clout, for white conservative clout, to get the attaboys, I suppose. Which is also very insulting, because they assume that you can't make up your own mind and you're just doing it for validation. Now, there are a lot of people on that app, just in general, who say things for validation. I am no such person. And I'm willing to be called all sorts of deflammatory things from leftists, including Coon, Uncle Tom. Candace Owens is a bit of a racial slur. I'm sure she's aware of that now. They like to call me Little Candace, which I don't understand, because I'm quite large. I'm quite large in stature, so I don't understand why I would be the Little Candace. She's a very teeny tiny person. I don't even know how tall she is, but she's obviously very skinny. If we were next to each other, it would probably look like I'm trying to absorb her. So I don't know why I'd be the little Candace. I think I'd be the big one. But anyway, but even though we share similar, ideas and values and stuff, we're still extraordinarily different people, and we wouldn't agree on everything. So, but when people throw that out there, sometimes people say it as a compliment because they really do like Candace, but people on the left usually say it because they think she's the equivalent of an Uncle Ruckus, which I've also been called that. So, they say those things to invalidate other black people who don't think the way that they're approved to think. So if you're someone who think that black people need to have some sort of approval thought process, you're a racist. And like I said, I didn't like to throw that word around, but I feel that is the case nowadays. So, so when they talk about white supremacy, I don't think they realize that a lot of these leftist activists are the ones who are really perpetrating those sort of things. And I'm going to break it down a little bit more. Particularly, I wanted to talk about this topic today because Merrick Garland, who's our Attorney General, thank God he's not, sitting on the Supreme Court and they blocked him, but he really shouldn't be Attorney General. They should have really fought Biden's picks more than what they did, but they didn't, and we're here. He made a statement about, domestic terror, white supremacy being like the biggest threat, and Biden has said that, and Director Frey has said that, but I don't think there's any basis in reality for that being the thing. Yes, there are a list of people you can go and look on the FBI's list and stuff, but that list expands for like a long time, and obviously it's just not the threat that it is today. But if you think in the minds of like critical race theory, where you are going to just assume everything involving a minority is some kind of racial based incident, then I guess you could come up with those numbers, sure. But it's a lot more complicated than that. Like, Democrats are accusing Republicans of whitewashing history and all this other kind of stuff, not liking critical race theory, but it's like, but they're the ones who are trying to simplify everything into race equals discrepancy equals bad, like racism, and like don't take into any other factors into account. So we're going to be talking about that today, but really quickly before I jump into my whole big spiel today, I do want to say that I'm sponsored today by the Brighton, Michigan PAC. I'm in their studio. They're set up, their green screen, everything like that. So I'm really grateful to be here today. A lot of great people serve on that PAC, and they just want to help people who are good people who want to, represent people well in the government. So good folks over there. So appreciate being in the studio. If you would like to support Black Tea News, you can do that by going to blacktnews.com, my website, /donate, or you can go by the PayPal, or you can go by the Cash App. Those sort of things would help, pay for the streaming, the travel, doing different coverage in events and so on. I'm looking to expand Black Tea radically, and you guys can be a part of that. So if you enjoy what I do, you enjoy the articles that I write on my website, you enjoy these broadcasts, I very much encourage you to go ahead and support in that way. Another way you can support is to visit the store, and I'm going to have some more things up for you soon, but I'm going to show you what I got that people really like. The Denounce White Supremacy, Defeat Joe Biden shirt. Very, very relevant today, I think. So you can go ahead and pick one of those up. It's got a list of things on the back, and you can trigger some leftists in your life today. You can also get this cool goat shirt. It also comes in a hoodie. And you can do that, or, man, I voted for President Trump and all I got was historic peace deals, border security, ISIS, destroyed emergency, energy independence, and so on, and ending with this lousy t-shirt that is particularly, I think, on point because Trump is being proven right on a lot of things, which, by the way, tomorrow, my theme of the day for tomorrow will be Trump was right. So that's good. That's the episode for tomorrow. So tell your friends, especially your lib friends. I'm sure they can leave colorful comments, but they need to be educated. So, and this last one I'm going to show you is I am not the victim you're looking for, which is really appropriate in today's topic. And so I think it's important. I know I talk about race a lot, but people don't realize how destructive the ideology is today, and they're really using it as a smokescreen to fundamentally shift and change and destroy our nation. So people need, like, a lot of people are talking about critical race theory and all kinds of other things, and it's important. It is critically important. People saw how much, like, the George Floyd stuff of Black Lives Matter, how much that just totally took captive of the nation, for a lot of different reasons. But we can see how important the narrative of race can bring a positive outcome or can totally decimate in the tunes of billions of dollars. So, and it's just so much larger than property damage. It's about what's being taught in schools to your kids, how they're setting them up for their belief in life, how they will go through life, the justice system. That's one reason why Merrick Garland and Biden saying the things that they're saying is pretty troubling. How obsessed with race they are. It's in our, medical practices. It's in our, it's in Hollywood. It's just everywhere. Everything is obsessed with it, and it is really, truly by design. We are not in a more racist world than when my dad was a young man, or when my grandmothers were young. It's not that same world, but people would have you believe that it is the same world, and we're even worse. So we're gonna break this down, and I hope you guys aren't getting bored with this, because when my dad tells stories over and over again in church, he's just like, well, you should be able to repeat it now, should you? So if you get into these kind of debates, these kind of arguments, please be prepared, because I don't want to be the only one talking about it. And I know I'm not literally the only person talking about it, because there's a lot of people, especially like on TikTok, friends within my circle. I'm friends with a lot of minority conservatives. But I'll hear other, white Republicans or so on saying, like, I'm so glad you're saying that, because of I said that I'd be called a racist. And I'm just like, I'm called a coon. So if I'm outnumbered all the time, that's what's going to keep causing issues, is when we might be a majority, but there's really no point in the silent majority if we're going to let those who are quiet, who are extremely hostile, take over everything. And then they'll start seeping into the minds of everyone and pressuring them until even if you were the silent majority still, it's not going to matter, but they're going to start whittling you down to just being the quiet minority too. So I don't want to be alone, and I don't want just Black people or Hispanic Republicans or Asian Republicans or whoever to talk about these things. I want everyone to have the freedom to speak on these issues. So thank you for watching. Thank you for being informed, and thank you for being part of the conversation. So I'm not going to play what Garland said. I'm going to play what McCabe said today about what Garland said. And there's a lot of interesting commentary surrounding this, so I'm going to start with this.
I thought it was significant. The Attorney General said very clearly that the FBI's view, the top domestic violent extremist threat right now comes from racially and ethnically motivated violent extremists. He's talking about white supremacists. But he also took care to note extremism and attacks on all political parties, on all races and creeds and religions. He noted the congressional baseball practice that was attacked only after the gunman had asked if they were Republicans. I thought it was significant. Did you think that was significant that he raised this?
Yeah, it was, Kate, and an incredibly deft way to bring in that other side of the equation. I mean, let's call it what it is, right? I think he came right out and said, our biggest hotspot right now is racially motivated, ethnically motivated extremists, and we all know that the broad majority of those are white supremacists, people targeting people of color and immigrants and things like that. But he brought the other side of the equation into it by referring to the shooting of the congressional baseball practice. And he did it very carefully by saying a shooting by someone who committed the shooting only after he confirmed that the players were Republican. So I think that reflects the fact that the FBI still doesn't exactly know what that shooter was up to. They never really uncovered the sort of detailed evidence that laid out a specific plot or an objective. But it is undeniable that he was targeting Republicans. It was really, I thought, very effective.
Okay, McCabe's just like, well, this happened and they did target Republicans, but there's not like a list or something, so we'll just never know his motivations. We'll never know. What? Okay, so if you don't know, he was a crazy leftist, particularly a Bernie supporter who went to the baseball field. He scoped it out. Republicans were practicing because Republicans and Democrats were played together like in a friendly game of baseball, and so he had a list of names, Republican names, on his list, and he went there and he made sure that they were Republicans playing, and then he proceeded to try to kill them, according to Rand Paul, when he was going through on TV and stuff. He said, I think he fired like 200 rounds, and they would have probably all died if not for Scalise being there. And Scalise, he's in a leadership position, so he actually had like security detail, and so the Capitol Police like saved their lives, but he was injured and nearly died. So when like stuff like this pops up, he's got something to say about it. He did have something to say about it, like what listed like the things that the shooter did, and it's like, how can you say that there wasn't a list? Like, oh, we'll never really know why he did. Like, it's because they were Republicans, and he was driven by like his crazy radical leftist ideology. As a matter of fact, according to Rand Paul, as he was shooting, he's yelling, "This is for health care." And at the time when he's doing this, they were having like rhetoric that was like, Republicans are killing you because of healthcare, because they won't pass, because they're attacking Obamacare or whatever kind of other stuff. So that was a sort of rhetoric that was going around. He was a crazy person, and he went in, he tried to do the deed. So actually a couple months ago, I guess they were having hearings or something, and Republicans learned, or at least they were talking about at this time, that the FBI classified this incident as suicide by cop. And they classified this clear case of domestic terrorism where a man clearly went to go kill Republicans over a political ideology, or he was mad at them over health care. So he decided to murder Republicans. They classified this as suicide by cop, even though the only reason why the Capitol Police were there is because Scalise was there and he had a detail. So obviously, that is the dumbest thing. So the person Republicans and Democrats were talking about, this is a really messed up classification. This should not be classified this way. It should be obviously classified as, domestic terror. But McCabe was like, acting at that time. So it's amazing that he can get like CNN and all these people bring him on when he's totally just like disgraced, in my opinion, but he should be disgraced. But when he's like, oh, it's amazing, we'll never know. It's like, we'll never know. Then you believe it's suicide by cop, right? That's how you guys classified it. So these people are just tragically disgusting. Just tragically disgusting with what they're willing to push as far as their ideology. So when you hear like the current FBI director who's like, oh, well, it's white supremacy, that's our biggest thing. Well, when you guys are willing to list suicide by cop with someone who's like, this is for healthcare, I don't know how we can possibly take you guys seriously at all. So Merrick Garland stressing, that white supremacy is a big threat and is the biggest threat, and McCabe and all these people think, yeah, it's the biggest threat. And then Joe Biden, the president of the United States, listing that too, and acting like that's their priority of focus, and that's where the whole country needs to be shifted on. So I'm going to play, this is like from the joint address, so I'm going to play a little clip of this.
And we won't ignore what our intelligence agencies have determined to be the most lethal terrorist threat to the homeland today. White supremacy is terrorism. We're not going to ignore that either. My fellow Americans, look, we have to come together to heal the soul of this nation. It was nearly a year ago before her father's funeral when I spoke with Gianna Floyd, George Floyd's young daughter. She's a little tyke, so I was kneeling down to talk to her so I could look her in the eye. She looked at me, she said, "My daddy changed the world." Well, after the conviction of George Floyd's murderer, we can see how right she was if we have the courage to act as a Congress. We've all seen the knee of injustice on the neck of Black Americans. Now's our opportunity to make some real progress. The vast majority of men and women wearing a uniform and a badge serve our communities, and they serve them honorably. I know them. I know they want... I know they want to help meet this moment as well. My fellow Americans, we have to come together to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the people they serve.
Okay, I don't know how you do that when you say inflammatory things, Mr. Biden. And maybe you felt like you can get away with that when you weren't president. When like Jacob Blake, when he got shot and they said some inflammatory things and suggested it was, racism, him and Kamala. And Kamala even said to Blake that she was proud of him when he, allegedly digitally raped his ex, and the police believe that he was about to steal those kids in the car, and he would not stop when they told him to stop, and he went for a weapon, and like the media was like, oh, he was unarmed, and he was like, nah, I was going for a weapon, I had a weapon. Like, so they do all these inflammatory things, and they inflamed all this stuff while Trump was the president because they wanted like America to be racist and Trump to be the face of the racism. And so the only way to solve the racism was to elect Joe Biden, who is like they say, like the filibuster is a Jim Crow era relic. It's like Biden is a Jim Crow era relic. What are you talking about, dude? So they're willing to fan these flames. And now that he's president, he's like, well, we need some unity, guys. We need unity. It's like, it doesn't work like that, sir. It doesn't work like, you can try, but like everyone still has these really, really high, adrenaline within them about all these situations or all these things that have happened after you've created this big issue. So it doesn't just go away. And we're seeing higher crime rates. We're seeing police like severely understaffed in places, Minneapolis, where all this basically popped off. They wanted to defund the police, and they realized it wasn't a good idea, so they decided to like put the funding back. But you're still going to find a lot of police officers who do not want to come back and do the work. So they've really created a lot of problems. And so you can say we want unity, but like even with January the 6th, which by the way, I don't know what was going on that day for me, but I wasn't like sort of like watching the news intently. I had friends who were there. It wasn't like, I don't know, my thing to go there or anything like that. So I was at home, and then eventually I heard about the stuff going on. And I'm just like, what the heck, guys? Like, this is like so weird. And I just tell people, I believe that a lot of people got played. And what the Democrats were saying happened. Because some people obviously did bad things and need to be charged and held accountable, but some people trespass and they can get them for that. But I mean, they just took selfies and they left. So, what some of the stuff that they are doing to some of these people, not holding them without bail, is, I mean, they treat these people worse than what Obama and Biden were to treat, Gitmo prisoners, honestly. But Joe, when they started to talk about it, I thought it was weird that Biden and them were just like, Biden and Kamala were like, well, if these were BLM protesters, the Capitol Police would have treated them worse. And it's like, okay, so you say you respect police, but now you're alleging that they're racist, and you're alleging that they're racist. So if they were like or have like at least political bias, that they would treat people differently because of either their skin color or their association. So which is really kind of crazy, because these people are facing worse consequences than the people who were at the BLM marches and protests, and though there was many of them, a majority of them that were peaceful, there were some doozies that were fiery but mostly peaceful Is that what CNN calls them? There were some doozies and billions of property damage, and people died. Like, a lot of people died. The only person who died as a result of what happened at the Capitol was Ashley Babbitt. So, who was shot by Capitol Police. So, to me, it was really weird when Kamala and Joe started comparing that to they themselves personally started comparing it to January 6th to the BLM riots. And I thought that was weird because I'm like, I wouldn't have done that. I wasn't going to play like, I don't know, tit for tat with that. But since you guys brought it up, that was way worse. And the people at the Capitol are being treated far worse than the people who were committing arson and theft and murder, attempted murder, and all these things like throughout the summer. So, and that was domestic terrorism, by the way, too. Like, these people were strategically targeting different things at different times. I mean, there's people who are more advanced than the people who are just like, some probably just showed up and like joined the stream of theft, but there are some organized efforts on that. And I hope to, get some people on the show to talk about that more specifically. But I also heard people say and advocate that they should do more raids like during the BLM riots that were like more strategic. And like, I'm like, okay, if you're talking about doing that more strategically, I'm like, you're like advocating for terrorism, right? And I'm like, no, that's not terrorism. I'm like, no, that's terrorism. So to me, it was really weird that they compared the two of them. But like I said, since they brought it up, I'll talk. We can talk about both. We can talk about both. Now, if you're like saying like, no, January 6th, I mean, they were doing the certifying the election and the imagery and the meaning of it, the significance. I admit all of those things are bad. But here's the thing. Because a lot of these people who were so gung-ho about how awful it was totally ignored what happened to everyday people, to business owners, to families, low-income like families too, because they like burned down low-income housing and all this other kind of stuff. To me, it kind of seems like if you would put that so far above like the what was happening repeatedly during the summer versus what happened for a few hours. Well, maybe like an hour or something, like within like an hour and a half, they're like back in doing what they're meant to do. So it's, if you try to say like it's the biggest like threat against our democracy since the Civil War, like our president like actually said that, of course, said it was remarkably stupid. If you really believe that lets me know that you don't care about average people who were significantly hurt. Like just throughout history in general, since you said all the way back through Civil War, but let's just talk about the summer. So I understand that we elect people to go represent us, but we elect them to represent us. And so the fact that you think you're so much better than the people who were scared and losing their businesses and losing their loved ones during the summer. I remember hearing it seems like the people are getting close, and I'm like, oh my gosh, if they run through my city, it's just going to burn to a crisp. Like, I remember being concerned about that, and we had some people who were on the ball, and it didn't spread like it could have in Michigan that it did in, like, other places. But there was a lot of people who were concerned and lost a lot, who really lost a lot, and they ignored it. They flat out ignored it. And they covered for it if they weren't just ignoring it. Like I said, CNN, fiery but mostly peaceful protest. So to me, when people talk about like January 6th is so much worse than that, I hear you don't care about the people. you care more about your elitist friends in DC or whatever, but you don't care about people of every day who the government is supposed to represent and take care of. So that's how I feel in regards to that. But another crazy thing about Joe Biden saying it's the worst threat of our democracy since like the Civil War is just like, I mean, we had segregation after that, Jim Crow laws. You had the Klan attacking people. You had he just honored or remembered the massacre in Oklahoma that happened like 100 years ago. So. I mean, we've had terrorists attack the Capitol, and actually one person who is like associated with that is a Black Lives Matter fundraiser. So there's just like we've had presidents assassinated. There's so much history that Joe Biden just like ignored. To say such a crazy thing like that. And what's the purpose? What really is the purpose of fanning the flames of racism so hard like this? So there's a book called Color, Communism, and Common Sense. And the author of that book, he talked about, well, he was actually a communist. And I believe, I think this book was written in 1939, if I'm not mistaken. It was a long time ago. And so in the book, he talks about how the Communist Party would raise up people and put them in levers of power in the U.S. And they would use black people like himself. And they would bring up things, even like, especially at the time, legitimate, valid things that people could be upset about race, okay? It's not like these problems didn't exist, especially like back then. But they would use those things as like a starting point to group people into communism. And they would teach all of these things are bad, you know, the westernized capitalist world, and the plights that you face as a black person and whatever persecution you're going through, they're going to circle it back around to the West is bad, capitalism is evil. And so their goal was always to push communism, and they would use black people and the plights of black people to do it. And so eventually he became disillusioned and he left, and he ended up becoming an informant for like the U.S., you know, to like tell people about this sort of stuff. So if you read the book, it's really eerie about the things that are going on today, because he talks about how it's just integrated so much of life, like, you know, academia, government, the church, so much plotted out. And so he became disillusioned with it all, because he realized that they're not for black people, they're not for good results, and a lot of the things that would have been good to him were things that they were against. And so, like, for example, the communists and their hatred of Christianity, for example. And so anyway, they would raise up these black people to push this message, but at the end of the day, they'd have these white handlers. They'd have these white handlers to also spy on these black activists who they would train up to make sure at the end of the day that their, I don't know, allegiance to being black or whatever to help their community didn't outweigh the actual, like, goals of communism. So that's why you can have a group like Black Lives Matter, and they say Black Lives Matter. It's in the title, right? Black Lives Matter. We're for black lives. We're doing this for black people. We love black. That's what you would think, like, from the name. But if you dig a little deeper in something like their What We're About page, you could see a lot of communist sort of garbage in there. So you would think, like, everyone with like a brain can see that something that's really bad for American life in general is when you don't have fathers in the home. By any like statistical measure, you're more likely, if you don't have like a father in the home, of course you're going to have less income. Of course, I mean, not of course, but you're more likely to not graduate high school. You're more likely to go on drugs. You're more likely to be a criminal. Just, you're more likely to produce more children out of, you know, without a father's, with a fatherless home. It's just not, it's not like a death sentence that your life is going to suck. I'm not saying that, but there's definitely a disadvantage that you would have in a lot of regards. So it is, and you know, it's highest in the black community, then it's like Hispanics, and then whites, and then Asians. And if you look at a median income, blacks have the lowest, and it's Hispanics, and it's whites, then it's Asians. I think there's some correlation there. So, but anyway, you would know if you have a brain or just look into it, like, oh, fatherless homes, that makes a big difference. And whether you're Republican or Democrat, you would think, and most people, I think, would agree that, like, getting fathers in the homes, they may go vote Democrat all the time, but even they'll be like, a problem and a big issue in the black community is that we don't have enough fathers in the homes, and that we're not having a two-parent system. We don't have that nuclear family structure, right? So you would think a group like Black Lives Matter would be pushing something like a nuclear family, uplifting the black father, and all this other kind of stuff. No. No. That's not what they do. That's not what they do. So even though like in the front, kind of space when they're selling their product, it looks like it's mainly for like police brutality and all the other stuff. That's just what they look like on the front end, which they don't do much things productive on that front. But on the back end, it's a lot of social justice, Marxist type ideology. So they used to have a page called What We're About, and I don't think I have it saved here. No, I do not have it here, but it's not on their website anymore. They took it down after I think it got a lot of like mainstream pushback. Because they did have it up there a long time. I couldn't believe how long they had it up there. I'm like, well, oh man, they're really proud of this. And so they had some striking things on there. And one of them was that they wanted to disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family. And so I always thought that was weird that they said Western prescribed, because I'm like, a lot of people have nuclear families. I mean, like, it's like in the Bible, right? Like Genesis, like you leave your mom and dad, you cling to each other, you start your own family, then you go be fruitful, multiply, like all that. Like that's, that's pretty like basic, like human nature kind of stuff. And I mean, not every like society follows that, but it's specifically not a white thing. It's just specifically not like a Western thing. So it's weird that they would refer it to that way, but that's just them trying to indoctrinate you that everything Western is bad. So they want to disrupt the nuclear family, and they also use some other language to be like, oh, we just want, like, as if they just want to make a space that's comfortable for everyone. And you know what, they uplift. If you're gay, if you're trans, if you're a single mom, they go through all these things. And so you're reading all these different things that they say they're inclusive and they want to uplift. And do you know what's missing? You can take a guess. Do you know what's missing? A black father. There wasn't anything in What We're About that talks about uplifting the black father and encouraging some kind of traditional, family unit. Like not that we can't be allies, but they don't do that. So that's pretty troubling, right? Well, when you start to realize that they have a goal that is always toward Marxist or communist, that sort of ideology, and that they always set it up that it has to be above the needs of the black community. I don't care how pro-black these activists are, if they're rooted in some kind of Marxist ideology, which the founders of Black Lives Matter admitted they were trained Marxist. It doesn't matter how pro-black they are. It doesn't matter if they know specific things that will help the black community. That cannot outrank the need to push communism. It cannot outrank that. So in the book Color Communism, Common Sense, it does talk about this. And this is a very old book. It is an old book. You should read it. It's very prophetic about what's happening today. But it gives a lot of insight into these people. And so even though you might have black activists who'll push it like Patrisse Cullors or whoever, there are still these white handlers that will make sure at the end of the day that you're not going to progress things that are going to elevate the black community. Because a lot of these leftists or whatever in general, it doesn't even have to be Marxists, but they don't want to solve problems, because once you solve problems, the money starts drying up, dude. You need people to be invested in problems so you can keep giving and they can keep doing outrage and so on. Like Tammy Bruce, she was a feminist. I don't know if she's still kind of technically, maybe, I don't think she identifies that self anymore, but she's a gay woman who's on Fox News as a, commentator. And she used to be, super on the left and feminist, but she ended up leaving when she realized that their goal was not to solve problems. Their goal was to, maybe they could make progress on a problem, but they would just find a new problem to be upset about. So that was their way, and so she realized how destructive that was, and she was like, well, we can't do that anymore. I'd like to not be a part of that. So she left and she joined the right side of history, I suppose. Another thing, if you look into, I've been talking about critical race theory a lot, especially like on TikTok and stuff. If you guys have seen, this document was put out by the African American Museum last year, and so they ended up taking down this infographic because it got a lot of backlash, rightly so. But if you haven't seen it, it's easy to find if you Google, a whiteness, signs of whiteness in African American Museum or whatever. It's very easy to find and talk about. So when I talk about critical race theory, I mention like this sort of document, and when your kids go into a classroom, if you have like little kids who are going to go into a classroom, like in elementary or something like that, no, they're not going to walk into the room and have like critical race theory 101 just on the board. That's not it's going to happen. But this sort of ideology is going to be pushed. Like Black Lives Matter, they have a doctrine or whatever. They have a system that they want taught in schools. And there are people who have like adopted it. Like, on my website, blacktnews.com, I do have a link to it in one of my articles about how Christians were duped by Black Lives Matter. You can check that out. And I do have a link in there to a Google document that has some of their curriculum. But really, it just has a lot of that same stuff that was in their What We're About page, and to push that sort of stuff, that sort of ideology. And it goes beyond race. It also goes beyond talking about gender and sexualities and other stuff like that. Things that kids should not really be pushed like that in schools, but that this is sort of stuff that they have. But this signs of whiteness thing is a really good indicator of certain things that they teach in their ideology, because at the end of the day, they're going to teach that they may just flat out separate your kids between the white people and the colored people, which I don't get that at all, because black people don't know what it's like to be Asians, and Asians don't know what it's like to be Hispanics. Like, maybe there are things that we can, I don't know, are similar that kind of transcend like race. Like, does everyone know what it's like to be persecuted, or discriminated against? Yeah, but white people know what that's like too. So if those are the things that are supposed to bind us together, why can't you include the white people? Because we're like, well, those people are more structurally privileged than all these other people. Well, if you break down, no, I mean, there are certain groups within even minority communities that excel and do well in life. Like Nigerian immigrants, they come over here and they kill it. They kill it. Asians do so well. Some people like to look at them as white adjacent. Like there was a school district in California that was trying not to include Asian people in their test results, because they didn't want it to mess up the rest of the minority students, so they wanted to include them with the rest of the white people. So whatever playing field that you think that you want to keep, black people down on or whatever, it's more complex than and some of it is culture and how people have been indoctrinating you through the years, because immigrants will come over without all that American self-absorbed baggage, and they'll take this land of opportunity by storm because they have a totally different mindset. So it's not all about the structural systemic stuff that they claim it is. A lot of it is what you have instilled within your children totally irresponsibly, or things that you've not paid attention to, that you've allowed teachers to instill within your children, or what they watch on TV. There's a vast amount of things that could have indoctrinated your kids, but people who come over here and are like, nah, I'm in America, so I'm going to do my best, I'm going to take advantage of it, and I'm going to own 5 shops and do whatever. Those people have a totally different mindset. It doesn't matter if they might share your same skin color, or they could be several shades darker, but they'll come over here and they'll do well. So what they claim puts people down isn't necessarily true. It's not true. So with critical race theory, they'll teach that, if you're a person of color, you're oppressed, you've gone through things, and the white people, even though maybe you personally didn't do something, you're still inherently biased, and there's a system set up, and you're treated better than these other people. And that's something that's literally been taught in cartoons. It's being taught in cartoons. There was a ad for Cartoon Network, And they used the characters from, I think, Steven Universe, if I'm not mistaken. And they were talking about see color. And it's important to see color. And you'll hear people push back on that. Like, you should see color, because if you're not seeing color, then you're ignoring the problems. Like, guys, like, what were people fighting to be equal, or were they not? Like, at some point in time, I think people would like to be on a level where none of this stuff sort of matters. Like, you would think that. I mean, there's a lot of people who don't want that, because they'd lose money, they'd lose power, they'd lose influence, and they wouldn't be able to push their Marxist agenda garbage, right? If everyone just kind of felt like those sort of things didn't matter anymore. So people really push back on the see color thing, but in the little video, and you can look this up. If you look on YouTube, it's like see color. There's a little black girl who's like, and there was white children, black children, and then like a purple character from Steven Universe, and or something Steven Universe like. I'm not sure. I don't watch the show, but they were talking about it's important to see color, and the little black girl knew that she was treated differently because she's black, and the white girl was made aware that person or knew that black girl was treated differently because she was black. So those are the things that they're instilling within your kids, that you're permanently set up to fail, and the white people should feel guilty about it. Now, there is the white guilt aspect that's just really destructive to people, and the racism toward putting the white people down. But another thing that I really hate about the critical race theory and stuff is how it infantilizes black people or minorities in general, and it shows them that you can't get ahead. It's totally acceptable if you can't get ahead because the whole system is against you. The qualities that you think the qualities that someone else might have, those are specifically Western white things, and it's okay if you don't have them. And I'll go over this document. I've gone over it before, but I'm going to go over it again. Just really, really briefly for some examples. And that's destructive, but the people who get in their mind and accept this, that, yeah, black people can't get ahead because X, Y, and Z. That's where the white supremacy is, dude. That's where the real white supremacy is. If you really believe that black people are so incapable, are just so incapable. And you see this with our president. Like, when he said the poor kids are just as smart as white kids, okay. I don't talk about that as much as other people do. Like, my sister who has children, she was heated, okay, when she heard that. She was so offended. I'm like, that was really bad. On the scale of things, bad things, he said, that's like mid-range. But I can accept he had a slip of the tongue, okay? But when you compare that to other things, like the minorities have a hard time getting on the internet. Like, if you want to see elderly people aren't as tech savvy, or low-income people, I get that, but just being like, minorities have a hard time, I'm like, okay, that's questionable, dude. And then recently he also said that young black entrepreneurs have troubles getting accountants and lawyers. So there's a pattern with Joe Biden where he just thinks black people are just less capable. And so I'm not sticking up for him. I'm like, there's a clear pattern here. But let me just go through a couple of these things to just really hit home on the fact that these people want you to put down, they'll let you put down black people. Actually, they prefer if it was kind of a trash group. All for the fact that they can keep pushing Marxist ideas. So you can see Marxist ideology in this. And by the way, in case you did not know, the African American History Museum, the huge one that's like 4 stories in DC, Washington, DC, is the one who made this infographic. And so things that they said are signs of whiteness, if you believe the individual is a primary unit, self-reliance. So they're teaching that self-reliance is bad. Independence. The nuclear family, objective, rational, linear thinking, cause and effect relationships. So a lot of these things are like based on good family structures or individuality. They think is bad. They're teaching that those things are bad because they're associated with whiteness. And if you expect society to have it, or then that's because it inherited through whiteness. Like, I might be an objective, rational thinker, but that's not because that's something that's inherited to black people. That's just because we inherit it culturally through whiteness. So you see how it's just really, really racist stuff. But the fact that they want you to associate it with whiteness, and they call it whiteness, is because they want it to be something that's looked at as something negative. And so when you think about being an individual and they want you to have a negative outlook on it, that's because at the end of the day, they want to push Marxism. They don't want to push that individuality is a good thing or that you can succeed. And then there's more things. Okay? And so this is the really big one that really bothers me. I mean, there's lots of things, but Christianity is a norm. Anything other than Judeo-Christian tradition is foreign, and no tolerance for deviation from a single God concept. And I'll go on a little bit more. Wealth equals worth. Your job is who you are. If you respect authority. High value on ownership of goods, space, and property. There's another one on the last page I want to get to really quick. Intent matters. Intent counts in the justice system. That's a big one. Being polite. There's another one. I think I missed it on the other page. But so I already told you about in this book, Color, Communism, Common Sense. He realized that, man, they hate Christianity. You know, it's right there, like embedded within the Marxism, that they want you to believe that Christianity is something that's whiteness and Western. And which is bizarre because it's, you know, people are always like, Jesus wasn't black. And it's like, yes, Jesus wasn't white. They'll get mad about that kind of stuff. I'm like, yes, it's true. Jesus was not white. And so why are you trying to make it seem like Christianity is a white man's religion? Why are you trying to do that? Because, you know, the most like Western thing I can think of is how self-absorbed we are about all these things with the racism and our history and all this kind of, like, people aren't, like in other nations and stuff, I don't think they can't possibly be as self-absorbed with their past scars and stuff where they would let it clearly define them so and hinder them to the degree that we're letting people do that today. That's what I think is like toxic Western culture. That's what I believe is toxic Western culture. But it's right there. They don't want you to like Christianity. They don't want you to like property. Private property, respect property, have the concept of property. Those are Marxist ideas right there. It's so evident if people just want to open their eyes and see. Now, again, we have a lot of people who like, you know, Marxism, socialism, communism. It's all, you know, in a similar thread. There are people who push for that, you know, today, and don't mind that, and that's their end game, that's their goal. But there are a lot of people, including black activists and so on, who perhaps have not got that revelation of Manning Johnson, who wrote the book Color, Communism, Common Sense, that are unaware that at the end of the day, your black community is not more important than supporting Marxist ideas. It's not more important. So he said, how can you invite people to watch live? You can go to Black Tea News on the Facebook page and just share it on pages, or you can put it in people's inbox, I guess. Or you can tell them to go to Black Tea, the page, and hit the notification bell. Make sure that they're following the pages, and or if they're on YouTube, hit the notification bell. And when I go live, people should be able to see it. So thank you for asking, and thank you for everyone who's tuned in periodically. Thank you for everyone who watches this back. I know, like, this is a weird time of day. People are getting off of work and so on, but I wanted to go live and talk about this because I am triggered by people. Like, I know a lot of people hate that word, and I guess maybe I kind of do, but I don't think I've said this on TikTok, and I'll say it here. I think the most dangerous threat, like Biden is trying to say it's white supremacy, and it's you know, but they think white supremacy, and they think like people like January 6th or something like that. And that's another thing that's dangerous about it. They think it's so broad, and they try to lump in basically every Trump supporter. If you do the okay thing, they think you're a white supremacist. So when you say things like that's the most dangerous, I don't know who you're coming after, because it seems pretty darn broad. It seems pretty darn broad. But I think the most dangerous threat, I kind of agree with them about the white supremacy, but I think the people who are saying that are the white supremacists. People like Biden, people who like push this critical race theory stuff, and they pretend like it's just education while they push garbage like this. They push garbage like this where black people don't have a sense of agency in the world, and they're just set up to fail because of systems. Even though people in the past who have faced worse things were able to be successful, and even though people who are immigrants will come over with nothing in their pockets and are able to succeed being the same shade or even darker than I am. But there are people who will try to say, well, black people can't survive in America. You heard Joe Biden talk about the knee on the neck of justice of black Americans. And it bothered me so badly when people talked about George Floyd. It was awful, like that visual, everything that we were watching. Even though in the trial, actually, they did present a different angle that showed that he actually wasn't on the neck. So that was an interesting tidbit. But look at Tony Tempa. There were other people, and he's a white person. There are other people who face the same thing. And I saw so many people say, like, this would have never happened to a white person. And it's just absolutely false. But when you share narratives like that, it is literally dangerous. It's literally dangerous. So what my biggest issue with white supremacy today is these people who are pushing that. So critical race theory is legit to me the greatest threat in America right now. Because, and like I said, your kids are going to walk into a classroom and it's not going to be like, your teacher's not going to have rainbows and all these kind of drawings. But like, today we're going to learn about critical race theory. That's not what they're going to do. But they're going to teach elements like this and inject minorities with a sense of you can't survive in this world. You're going to have an excuse to always fail. They're going to set them up for failure, and they're going to villainize the white kids. I don't want that to happen in this country. But that's what's being taught in the schools. Not literally everywhere, but that's the sentiment, and it's growing. I'm really glad that there's people pushing back against it. But that's in the schools, and not just in college. They're not waiting for your kids to get in college to indoctrinate them. That is happening at the youngest level possible. They're putting it in their cartoons. They're putting it in Hollywood. They're putting it on TV shows. They're putting it in your books. They're putting it in they're putting it everywhere. They're instilling it in your government. Your government elected officials are putting it in places. They're enacting it in the military. They're enacting it in the government and all these different processes. I think one of the most important things that Trump did before he left office was he started talking about critical race theory and stopping it from spreading in the government. But Biden walked that back. And it was a little too late for Trump too. I wish he had done it sooner, but I did appreciate that. That was enough for me to vote for him. It sure was. So the last thing I want to mention is this article, because I'm about to wrap it up. But I saw this article in Yahoo News, Yahoo News. And they were talking about, so people are obsessed now with Asian hate crime, right? Even though the left likes to ignore Asians because they do very well. And like, when it's like, oh, is Harvard discriminating against them, not letting them get in? We don't know about that. And it's like, even though there's like hard data about what that, like, they ignore stuff like that. But when a psychopath goes and tries to, and he goes and he kills several people, like, oh, this was a hate crime, even though it's like more like he was a psychotic person with a sexual addiction. It wasn't like racially motivated. They said what they wanted to say to get whatever point across. And then they passed the anti-Asian hate bill, which, they don't care about a bill when it's like only 8 pages. And so it was a bill that really had no teeth in it. And so Ted Cruz tried to include something about penalizing schools that discriminate against Asians, but they wouldn't pass that. They wouldn't do something that would actually do something to help Asians. But if you look at the details of who's actually attacking Asians, because they'll say that all this stuff gave way because of rise in Trump, his rhetoric or whatever, because he said things like the Kung Flu and whatnot and stuff like that. This just wasn't true. And if you look at the demographics of the people actually committing like hate crimes, or I don't even know if it's necessarily hate crimes or just like people just doing crimes, and these are people who who should be in jail, but they did the reform on the cash bail and all that other stuff, where these prosecutors are so left-leaning and backed by Soros or whoever, they don't believe in actually like prosecuting people anymore. And they just kind of let them go, and these bad people are back on the streets like immediately to do more harmful crime or whatever. And that might be why you see the rise in just attacks in general. But there was an article, but a lot of these people are unfortunately, they are black. And given that they'll be in like places like I don't think the black guy attacking an Asian person on the subway in New York probably voted for Trump, is what I'm saying. These aren't MAGA people, really. And so there's Yahoo News did an article saying white supremacy is the root of all race-related violence in the U.S. That's darn suspicious. The point I've made through all of those experiences is that anti-Asian racism has the same source as anti-black racism. White supremacy. So when a black person attacks an Asian person, the encounter is fueled perhaps by racism, but very specifically by white supremacy. White supremacy does not require a white person to perpetrate it. What on God's green earth is that garbage? That a black person can attack an Asian person, and it could be a hate crime or whatever, but we're still going to blame white supremacy? That is suspect. But if you are looking through the lens of critical race theory, it makes total sense. It makes total sense, because at the end of the day, they're going to attribute everything bad to whiteness. And that's their goal, because at the end of the day, they're going to push Marxist ideology, and they're using even things that will be like legitimate things you can be upset about, like on a racial level. They would be willing to even use that and abuse it and exploit it to push their agenda. At the end of the day, they don't care about Asians, they don't care about Hispanics, they don't care about blacks. They have to uplift their ideology. And so I'm going to continue pushing back on this, and I'll have to do like a full day kind of going into history of critical race theory, and I'm going to keep hammering it because it is important. Don't let people gaslight you and lie to you and say that it's just about history. That's not even true. It's not even true, because they don't even care about the complexities of the history. They just want to, say it the way that they want to. And they, Biden will talk about this stuff, but do they mention how much the Democrats had a hand in it? No, they don't want to talk about that kind of stuff. They want to talk about redlining, systemic racism. Even it's outlawed now, whatever. But it's like, who passed that? Who passed redlining? That was the Democrats. That's a Democrat thing. And yet these people are still out here voting Democrat. So, yeah, but they don't want to talk about that. That's just something that white people did. The whole white people, even like white people today, you're all responsible for this. You're all responsible for this systemic stuff that's happened, and you're on a different playing field, and you're somehow responsible, and you have to have collective white guilt for all these things that happened. But we can't even mention who passed the bills and what letter they had at the end of their name to associate with what party. That's crazy. That is crazy, but they don't want to mention the inconvenient facts. The facts that are super inconvenient for them. So, in closing, these people who talk about white supremacy, they are wild perpetrators of it. Joe Biden, and not just over the racist things he said, their sentiment where they can just use black people as a tool, like Nancy Pelosi thanking George Floyd for dying for justice, which he didn't die for justice. He's not the Christ who decided to go to the cross and be the lamb that was slain for whatever thing. He was killed. Whether you think that Chauvin did it himself, or it was that combined with the drugs, or if it was just the drugs, he died that day. And it did dramatically change the nation, Floyd's daughter said. I don't think it was for the better. I don't think it was for the better. And it really hurt a lot of people in the end. And whether you think that Chauvin deserved it, there was some shady stuff about that people who were on the jury, and he should get a mistrial. I don't think he will, though. But anyway, I don't want to get into all that today. But the last thing I will say, I know I'm doing a preacher thing and having 5 closings, but another policy that Biden Obama had with their title treating colleges rape accusations where like someone would just have like a kind of no due process for these young men on college campuses and stuff, and they would just be expelled and whatever, and their lives and careers kind of like uprooted. And so Trump put it into that, and people were mad at him and DeVos and stuff. And so, but people don't realize that those policies, they didn't just hurt like men in general, they hurt black men. They hurt black men. And there's a specific case where they fought back, and there were some black men involved in that suit. And when the Kavanaugh hearing happened, there was, I can't remember this Washington Post, but someone did a story where they were talking to black men about the Kavanaugh thing, and they're just like, no, due process is important. And so the writer of the story was just kind of surprised that they were defending Kavanaugh, which there was no evidence, supporting that he did what Christine Ford alleged. But they're just like, no, at the end of the day, due process is important. And they know that because if they were in a situation like that, they want the justice system to work for them. But if you go back to that document, they don't like that either. They don't believe that your intent and stuff like that should count either. So it doesn't matter to them, to people like Biden or people or Obama who implement those policies. It doesn't matter that it might hurt black people, black men, and more of them might have to suffer, or just people in general. At the end of the day, their ideology is more important in these communities that they claim that they care about. So you might be asking, what can we do to fight back? What can we do to solve these problems? You have to keep informing your friends and your neighbors and your friends and family and loved ones about this evil ideology. It is not hard. It is not hard to look up critical race theory and see that it is tied to critical theory. And critical theory is a Marxist ideology. It is literally not hard to make that connection. As a matter of fact, if you look up the people who started critical race theory, they admit that it's like derived from critical theory. So it is not hard to pair them together. If you need to convince people, like I said, there's going to be some people who are all bought in, but if you look up the book, Color, Communism, and Common Sense. And I'm going to keep talking about this stuff. You can take notes and to have good talking points. But please support these people who go share stories when you see black mothers in local meetings, the school board meetings, and telling their stories about why critical race theory is evil. And don't let people gaslight you to believe it's just a history thing. It's not. It's really not. And I think I've laid out a case several times, but we can keep talking about it if we have to. So you be brave enough to have these discussions. I don't care if you're white and you don't want to be called a racist. You got to buck up. We all have to stand up and together and admit these things are wrong, talk about how wrong these things are. If we want to have some kind of unified nation where we can treat each other well and equally, because this sort of stuff, they talk about equity and stuff, which isn't the same as equality, and they're just going to keep bringing everyone down together until we have overthrow all of our systems so we can put something else in place, which will be socialism, communism, whatever. That's the end game. That's the goal. So they're just, we're cultural Marxism, hear that a lot, but it is what it is. And if you have to talk about it specifically with these sort of examples, do that, because people hear buzzwords and then they zone out. But you can give them specific examples. That whiteness document is easy to find on Google. You can easily find the What We're About page, not on the Black Lives Matter website, but you can Google it. People have screenshot it. The internet is forever. So look up those things, share those things, and if I were you, I would get your kids out of public schools. That's what I would do. I would homeschool them myself. That's what I will do. Put them in private schools, whatever. I would not let them be at the mercy of indoctrination. And if there's people who are homeschooling their kids and they're kind of new at that, and you can help them in some kind of way, I would help them too. I think actually that's the most effective and biggest thing that we can do is push back on the education system and take out these kids so they won't be able to indoctrinate them in that way. And if you also have to stop watching things like Nickelodeon and Disney or whatever that start pushing this sort of ideology, you got to be a big girl and boy and do that too. There's a lot of evil things that are being pushed on TV that your kids should not be seeing and subject to. So you got to keep an eye out for that stuff too. But anyway, please go to blacktnews.com. If you like this broadcast, if you appreciate what I'm talking about, please consider supporting. I have that ticker tape, screen at the bottom that you can do it by PayPal, or you can do it via Cash App, or you can go to the website, blacktnews.com/donate. Please check out articles that I've written. Please share those. Please follow me on my social media platforms. Most of my social media is Black T News at whatever. So if it's TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, the only one that's different is Twitter, which is at TrueBlackT. So you can find me on those platforms, and please go check out merchandise that we have there, like the I Am Not the Victim You're Looking For, or the Denounce White Supremacy, since that is our topic of the day, and defeat Joe Biden, with a list of his grievances on the back. So thank you guys so much for being here on today. Last thing I'm going to say, I also have a book, Slay Your Fear, How to Overcome a Spirit of Fear, which I started writing it because of COVID, and seeing that they made you all terribly afraid for a lot of things that maybe you didn't need to be. I feel very vindicated. But I mean, the whole book isn't about COVID, but I did use that as one of the examples. And if people can make you afraid, especially irrationally afraid, they have a lot of power over you. So I don't believe that God has given us a spirit of fear. He's given us power, love, and a sound mind. And so that's really the theme of the book. So please go check that out. I am also working on a very good book, political book. It'll be my first political book that you guys, I'm sure, will love. And once I have some more of it kind of down, I will tell you the title, which I'm sure you guys will love the title and go gaga for it. I'm looking forward to doing that and sharing that all with you at a later time. But anyway, God bless you all, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.